Engineering Services Group Leader. Actually, I should talk into the mic here. The Networking Engineering Services Group Leader for the Energy Sciences Network. And you can go ahead and hit your laptop up while I'm talking. He serves as a key member of ESNet's leadership team overseeing network engineering services that support data-intensive scientific collaborations around the world. Mike is a IEEE Standards Association member and a contributor to the end user's perspective to several Ethernet standards. In particular, he served as a chair on the IEEE 802.3 AZ, which was an energy efficient Ethernet task force. And we're going to hear a little bit about that. And I think it's very, very interesting. I think a lot of us have seen as we've increased our speeds, as we deployed more networking services, the energy used by our switches and routers has actually become significant, whether that be in the data center, whether it be on our campuses, or that be infrastructure that our providers are having to support. So we certainly look forward to hearing what you've got to say, Michael.
Thank you. So just to give you an idea about what I'm going to talk about, I'll preface this with, if we have a little extra time, then I don't have to go quite as fast, because I planned for 20 minutes and then had 26 slides by the time it was done. So what I will do is kind of just brush through the motivational stuff for why network energy efficiency and spend more time on how it works, defining it, how it works, what the trade-offs are, and so forth. One thing I have to do is just say that if I mention IEEE in this talk, that it's my own opinion, so that way the IEEE is off the hook. And I'm off the hook, I guess. So network energy efficiency. This work actually started back around 2005, just to give you sort of the frame of reference. And the question came up within some members of 802.3, and so the scope of that work was Ethernet. So the first, I get a lot of questions along the way, especially way back when we started this. Why do we want to make Ethernet more energy efficient? And so in order to try to help answer that question, one of the things that I wanted to do was just say that, well, within the scope of 802.3, Ethernet was what we could work on. So that's the thing that we were going to focus on. The other thing is a common sort of train of thought that I encountered along the way was, well, if you don't save that much energy, a half a watt per port or something, then is it really worth doing anything? And on the surface, it might not seem so, but when you consider the number of 10, 100, 1,000 ports that are out in the network, in the market, we're talking about billions of ports. So it adds up. So those are the sort of things that were behind getting us to energy efficient Ethernet. And I've got a couple things in here, just sort of fun facts, like if you take a look at the global data center electricity used back in 2010, it accounted for about a little over 1% of the world's electricity use. So, it adds up. So the goal was to take Ethernet from an always on, from a power perspective, to use enough energy to do the work and then try to save energy again. So we wanted to make the network proportional to the useful work. In this case, what I mean by proportional is just, or useful work rather, is sending data rather than sending signals to keep the link partners all, in a near error-free mode. And then just to give you an idea about how much of the energy savings can come from the network, roughly 5% of data center electricity, about 225 million back in 2006, and that was in the US only. But again, this is just to give you a sense of what could be saved. Why this would matter? Well, I've just listed basically what boils down to, it's possible that you could get some incentives to make improvements to your network or a data center by having things like an energy efficient protocol to use to achieve that. And this is just sort of a cartoon graph of what we were aiming to accomplish. Energy proportional is the green line. That was the target for IEEE. There's actually been some analysis done that we're not quite there yet. There's sort of a little bit, if you go look at the analysis, there's sort of a curve like that. So we have some work to do in this region at the lower utilization to improve it, and there's been some work done on that since the publication of the standard. Where's the opportunity come within energy efficient Ethernet to actually save energy? One of the things that I encountered along the way pretty frequently is, well, the network is, we're talking about 100 gig. If we need all this bandwidth, then, how are we going to save energy? Isn't the network, mostly fully utilized? Now, if you take a look at traffic patterns, you'll find that in some cases it is. That conversation earlier about what the data flows look like, I actually have in the backup slides a couple of shots of our ESNet's utilization over a 24-hour period, just to give you a sense of the science data network is probably more heavily utilized, and so you'll see a different pattern than, say, a content data network, where you have a lot of transactions during a period of time of the day, and then it tapers off, and then it comes back up again, so you have this nice sort of diurnal pattern. This was, I think, taken over a couple of weeks. And the point here is that each of those valleys represents an opportunity to save energy. When you go towards an idle mode, that's where the opportunity is for energy savings. And then just to put a fine point on that in terms of dollars, this was just really to give you an idea of how much money was spent just to, operate data centers, and a portion of that being the network. I think the one that I like to point out is just, this is kind of old data, but in 2006, the U.S. spent about, what are we talking about, $4.5 billion in energy costs altogether. So again, it adds up, and if you can save 4 or 5% of that, that's a pretty good chunk of money. Now, drilling down to the network interface, how much energy can we save there? We had to estimate that during the project, and we came in pretty close to 90%, and then there were measurements made afterwards. I provided the reference there, but about the port itself, when it's in low power idle mode, which I'll explain in a moment what that means, we can save about 90% of the energy at the port. And then within the network interface itself, roughly 70%. So for a gigabit port, that works out to about a half a watt these days. Okay, so now we'll drill in a little bit more about what IEEE is. It's basically a protocol that we developed which allows us to scale the energy use with link utilization. It was published in 802.3AZ 2012. Again, the premise here is that there's some idle time on an Ethernet link, and that's when we can save energy using this low power idle mode. It's specified in that standard for what I call the base Ts, which is 10, 100, 1000, and 10G base T. And it's also specified for backplanes, except for 40 gig, which is actually 40 gig, 100 gig backplane, next generation optics, and 400 gig. Those are all projects that are in progress now, and some form of IEEE is being specified there as well. So the method is called low power idle. And just I'll point it out now, but we'll get touch base on it here in a moment, that for optical Ethernet greater than 10 gig, we had to introduce the concept of fast wake, because there are some potentially issues with turning off the laser and the transmitter in an optical interface. So the key here is just that in order to achieve energy efficiency, we need to essentially consider the power and time that the interface is in the active mode, and also the power and time the interface is in the idle mode, and then just try to optimize that to only use energy when we need it. And the other point I want to make here is that since time is a factor here, that it's actually good from an energy efficiency perspective to go to a higher speed, because the bit times are shorter. So, faster is also good. It's not necessarily like, we want to make it all slow. We just want to make it energy efficient. And then this picture is just really meant to give you a sense of where in the stack that we're doing the work, where the bulk of the protocol operates for IEEE. Again, it's a simple concept. You use the energy while the interface is active, and then reduce it during low power idle mode. So this is where we kind of get into the meat of it. This picture is essentially taking you from the case where the interface starts off in active or normal idle mode through the transition from active to quiet, and then back to active or normal idle. Essentially what happens is communication happens between link partners, so that when the transmitter knows that it's not going to have actual data to send anymore, it will send a signal to its link partner saying, hey, we're going to go to sleep. And then you've just got these parameters to describe the time, but for some duration, we send this sleep signal. The receiver says, okay, I know you're going to sleep. The transmitter stops transmitting for a period of time. We actually studied this during the project, that there's a certain period of time that you can't, once you go beyond that time, you won't be able to recover the link, and then you have to go back through auto negotiation, and then the link drops, that you take a 2-second hit. It's unacceptable. So we had to come up with a signal that we call refresh, that we send periodically to allow the receiver to have enough signal to remain in a near error-free mode. So for that period of time when there's no data to send, several refresh signals are sent. And then when the transmitter detects that there's actual data to send again, it'll send the alert and wake signals so the receiver can prepare to receive normal idle or data. This is leading into some of the trade-offs for IEEE. So we can save energy during this quiet time. That's where the energy is saved. However, the trade-off here, if it isn't obvious, is that it takes time to wake up. So you're going to have some cases where your latency variation will increase. So that's the trade-off. There's no free lunch, that we have to use a little bit of time to wake up the system, so the latency variation will increase. The other thing is since we're not dropping the link, we use auto negotiation to signal the capability between the link partners. So the link partners agree, yes, I can do IEEE, great, the link's up, we start operation. But if you want to change any of those parameters, the one thing that I didn't really discuss here, I should go back to for a second, is this notion of the TW-Phi and TW-Sys. This is the wake time. The minimum amount of time that it takes to wake up the interface is the TW-Phi, which is the wake time to wake up the interface. And then this TW-Sys is extended, and it's intended to allow the receiver more time to wake up, so that if you turn off other parts of the system, not just the physical interface, then you can sort of buy some time to wake up that part of the system as well, so that you're able to receive data again without losing any packets. So we can communicate that parameter TW-Sys using LLDP. So you send the frame, it gets set in the local MIB, and then the frame gets sent to the link partner. It gets reflected in the remote MIB, and the system can take advantage of that. And this picture is intended to show just sort of where you might be able to turn off other components in the system and save even more energy. And if somebody were to really implement this, the opportunity to save energy is really significant. Now, instead of a half a watt per port, the number that I keep tossing around for a gigabit connection, you could be talking potentially tens of watts in a system. And again, it doesn't sound like much, but when you have that times a lot of things, it adds up. So that's one of the areas that I'll mention again as an area for development. So the trade-offs. Latency is the trade-off for using IEEE. You may have followed in the industry, there's sort of what I call a latency arms race, where because the financial market, for example, they want absolute minimum latencies so that they can make their transactions as quickly as possible. You probably wouldn't find IEEE enabled in that kind of network, because they just wouldn't be willing to accept the few microseconds of latency variation. But for a vast number of other applications, it's completely, I would say, transparent to the user, especially in an enterprise network. For the typical things that you do in an enterprise device, the user would never even notice it. And so just to give you a sense of the amount of latency variation, single-digit microseconds for 10 gig, and hundreds of nanoseconds actually for 40 and 100 gig. And that's currently under development. Okay, so what about optical networks? When we did the initial work on 802.3 AZ, we didn't actually consider optical networks. Somebody brought in a proposal like at the very end of our study group period, which was, that was too late. If they brought it in earlier when we were sort of studying the problem and talking about the different ways that we might be able to include it in the project, we might have been able to do something, but it didn't happen. So what ends up happening is sort of the train has left the station, we go off and do the project, and then later on it becomes desirable in new projects, and so we had to go back and introduce it. So it was introduced in 40 and 100 gig optics, and then the topic of latency came up again. So, and the even bigger problem was, we can't shut the laser off in the transmitter for very long, otherwise that'll cause it to go into a mode where you introduce errors, which is completely undesirable. So what we ended up doing is developing this notion of a fast wake, which is simply don't shut off the transmitter but send the low power idle signal so that the system can still look for that signal and shut off other parts of the system. You may even be able to shut off some non-essential components in the transmitter and receiver, just not the laser transmitter. But it's not going to save as much energy as you would be able to with what we call deep sleep in the optical world, which is really just low power idle, where you turn off everything that you can possibly turn off. So that's the trade-off there. The other thing I'll just point out that since 40 and 100 gig networks are also often used with optical transport networks, that there was a concern about mapping the signal from Ethernet into OTN and what that meant for an OTN network, because they didn't know how to deal with low power idle. So that problem is currently being considered. I believe right now it's just going to be sent transparently through the network. It's not going to be mapped, but I don't really know off the top of my head where we stand with that one. So again, going back to the picture, it's a lot simpler. I mean, it's just really either data or normal idle or low power idle being sent rather than all these other parameters. So again, the real opportunity to save energy with the optical network has to do with taking advantage of the low power idle signal and turning off targeted parts of the system that you're able to implement. But this is all kind of in development. And again, it's probably not going to show up in a financial transaction network. So when will IEEE for optical networks be available? According to the website, the standard's on track to be completed in 2015. So we'll be able to actually see the implementation in the standard next year. So the point that I want to make here is the tools are being created from an Ethernet perspective. You have the ability to actually reduce your energy footprint. But the next thing that has to happen is that the manufacturers actually have to make the protocol useful in the device. So oftentimes from a network operator's perspective, it's going to be simply log in and either enable IEEE or disable it depending on the application. But the network equipment vendors have to make it available for us to be able to actually use it. And the logical thing that follows from that is that we users have to be asking for the feature if we want it to show up in the equipment. And then the other thing that I'll just point out is there's plenty of room for innovation here. The one thing about creating the protocol in Ethernet is that from from a standards development perspective, it's always interesting because we never know how somebody's going to actually end up using it and innovating it. So I look forward to seeing people working on it and actually come up with new creative ways to save energy. So just to sort of wind this up, the main thing here is that we were trying to improve the efficiency of the information communication technology that Ethernet operates in. Again, it's a way to make Ethernet energy proportional so that you actually just use the amount of energy you need in order to send useful information and then go back to low energy mode. The obvious trade-off here is the increase in latency. Again, it's in the order of single-digit microseconds or less, and the newest version of IEEE will be coming next year. And with that, I'll take any questions you might have. Yes?
Is it possible to leave power over Ethernet turned on while the data communication side goes to low power?
Okay, so the question is it possible to have power over Ethernet enabled and still have the same interface operating in low power idle mode? Is that correct? Yes. That's an interesting question. So I don't know for sure the answer to that question. I would say that it's probably going to be up to the actual network equipment vendor's implementation, but I can't think of a reason off the top of my head that you couldn't do that if the vendor allowed you to. Now, whether it makes sense to do that or not is another story.
Well, if you're charging a battery in the laptop.
It's possible. Yeah, it's possible. Yes.
At UC San Diego, there's a group that's working on data center energy optimization by sort of handing off large persistent flows from an electrical path to an optical path on the fly. I don't know if they're working in this arena, and I can see how it could be complementary that once you've migrated off the electrical path, you turn off that port.
Yes.
But is there any working in your area that seems relevant to data center optimization?
Right, so the question has to do with data center traffic optimization, it sounds like, and moving traffic from an electrical to an optical network. And then am I aware of any work being done to couple that with energy efficient Ethernet? I'm not aware of it per se. I actually have my own set of questions having to do with SDN in the same case, where if you could use SDN to send traffic in a different way. I have read papers where people are studying sending traffic to optimize paths in order to shut off devices in data centers. So I know there's work going on there. I haven't seen anything specific to IEEE in that regard. Yes?
Is there a way to anticipate, remember you had this graph of traffic, is there a way that the device can learn, like to have a learning period, and you say, okay, within the last month, then no traffic from this time to this time, it would be wise to cut it off?
That's a great question. I don't know the answer to that question. The question being, is there a way to sort of predict the traffic patterns? And maybe there'd be some statistical way to do that. If you could study the utilization over a period of time, then you might be able to say within some probability the utilization is going to change. That'd be way outside the scope of IEEE, but there might be, again, a network equipment vendor implementation that might be able to do that, or maybe sort of I'm trying to think of a product, but sort of a network management system that might be able to do that if it was energy aware. But I don't know if that's if that capability exists. Any other questions? Great.